Section 28 of John Inglesant, A Romance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. John Inglesant, A Romance by Joseph Henry Shorthouse. Chapter 19. Inglesant was present at the funeral in the cemetery of the convent, and caused a white marble cross to be set over the grave. He remained in his lodgings several days, melancholy and alone. His whole nature was shaken to the foundation, and life was made more holy and solemn to him than ever before. The burden of worldly matters became intolerable, and the coil that had been about his life so long grew more oppressive, till it seemed to stifle his soul. He desired to listen to the divine voice, but the voice seemed silent, or to speak only the language of worldly plans and schemes. He desired to live a life of holiness, but the only life that seemed possible to him was one of business and intrigue. What was this life of holiness that men ought to lead? Could it be followed in the world, or must he retire to some monastic solitude to cultivate it? And was it certain that it would flourish even there? It seemed more and more impossible for him to find it. He was repulsed and turned back upon his worldly life at every attempt he made. He almost resolved to give up the Jesuit and to seek some more spiritual guide. He remembered Cressy, who had become a Romanist and a Benedictine monk of the monastery Douay, and was at that moment in Paris. When Inglesant had been last in Oxford, the secession of Hugh Paulin Cressy, as he had been named at the font in Wakefield Church, Serenus de Cressy, as he called himself in religion, had created a painful and disturbed impression. A fellow of Merton, the chaplain and friend of Lord Strafford, and afterwards of Lord Falkland, a quick and accurate disputant, a fine and persuasive preacher, a man of sweet and attractive nature, and of natural and acquired refinement, he was one of the leaders of the highest thought and culture of the university. When it was known, therefore, that this man, so admired and beloved, had seceded to popery, the interest and excitement were very great, and one of Archbishop Usher's friends writes to him in pathetic words of the loss of this bright ornament of the church, and of the danger to others which his example might cause. He was at present in Paris, where the conjuncture of religious affairs was very exciting. There was much in the discussions which were going on singularly fitted to Inglesant's state of mind, and in some degree conducive to it. The Jesuits, both in Rome and Paris, were occupied, as they had been for several years, in that great controversy with the followers of Jansenius, which a few years afterwards culminated in those discussions and that condemnation in the Sorbonne so graphically described by Pascal. We have only to do with it as it affected Inglesant, and it is therefore not necessary to inquire what were the real reasons which caused the Jesuits to oppose the Jansenists. The point at which the controversy had arrived when Inglesant was in Paris was one which touched closely upon the topics most interesting to his heart. This was the doctrine of sufficient grace. The Jesuits on this, as in all other matters, had taken that side which is undoubtedly most pleasing to the frailty of the human heart, an invariable policy to which they owed their supremacy over the popular mind. When the faithful came to the theologians to inquire what was the true state of human nature since its corruption, they received St. Augustine's answer, confirmed by St. Bernard and St. Thomas Aquinas, and finally adopted by the Jansenists, that human nature has no more sufficient grace than God is pleased to bestow upon it, and that fresh efficacious grace must constantly be given by God, which grace God does not give to all, and without which no man can be saved. In opposition to this, the Jesuits, about the time of the Reformation, came forward with what was called a new doctrine, that sufficient grace is given to all men, as men but so far compliant with free will that this latter makes the former efficacious or inefficacious at its choice, without any new supply from God. The Jansenists retorted that this doctrine rendered unnecessary the efficacious grace of Jesus Christ, but that this does not follow is plain, for this efficacious grace of God that is given to all men once for all may be owing to the sacrifice of Christ. To many natures this universal, gracious, beneficent doctrine of all-pervading grace, which includes all mankind, was much more pleasing than the doctrine of the necessity of special grace involving spiritual assumption in those who possess it, or say they do, and bitter uncertainty and depression in humble, self-doubting, and thoughtful minds. It resembled also the doctrines of the Laudian school in which Inglesant had been brought up. So attractive indeed was it that the Benedictines were compelled to profess it and to pretend to side with the Jesuits, while in reality hating their doctrine. When Inglesant remembered Cressy, and remembered also that he belonged to the Benedictines, the polished and learned cultivators of the useful arts, and was told that Cressy had chosen this order that he might have leisure and books to prosecute his studies and his writings, he conceived great hope that from him he should learn the happy mean he was in search of, between the worldliness of the Jesuits on the one hand, and the narrow repulsiveness of the mendicant orders and the Calvinists on the other. In this frame of mind he sought an interview with Cressy. The directions of the Jesuits and of the Laudian school seemed to Inglesant to have failed. To have associated himself with the Jansenists or Calvinists would have been distasteful to him and almost impossible. He sought in the Benedictine monk that compromise which the heart of man is perpetually seeking between the things of this world and the things of God. But though for the time the influence of the training of his life was somewhat shaken, it was far from removed, and an event occurred which even before he saw Cressy reforged the chains upon him to some extent. One Sunday evening, the day before he was to meet Cressy, walking along the Rue Saint-Martin from the boulevard where he had lodgings, he turned into the Jesuits' church just as the sermon had begun. The dim light found its way into the vast church from the stained windows. A lamp burning before some shrine shone partially on the preacher as he stood in the stone pulpit by a great pillar, in his white surplice and rich embroidered stole. He was a young man, thin and sad-looking, and spoke slowly, when with long pauses and intervals, but with an intense eagerness and pathos that went to every heart. The first words that Inglesant heard as he reached the nearest unoccupied place were these: "Ah, if you adored a God crowned with roses and with pearls, it were a matter nothing strange but to prostrate yourselves daily before a crucifix charged with nails and thorns, you living in such excess and superfluity in the flesh, dissolved in softness. How can that be but cruel? Ah, think of that crucifix as you lie warm in silken curtains perfumed with eau de naf, as you sit at dainty feasts, as you ride forth in the sunshine in gallantry. He is cold and naked, he is alone. Behind him the sky is dreary and streaked with darkening clouds, for the night cometh, the night of God. His locks are wet with the driving rain, his hair is frozen with the sleet, his beauty is departed from him. All men have left him, all men and God also, and the holy angels hide their faces. He is crowned with thorns, but you with garlands. He wears nothing in his hands but piercing nails. You have rubies and diamonds on yours. Ah, will you tell me you can still be faithful, though in brave array? I give that answer which Tertullian gave. I fear this neck snared with wreaths and ropes of pearls and emeralds. I fear the sword of persecution can find no entrance there. No, hear you not the voice of the crucifix? Follow me. We are engaged to suffer by his sufferings as we look on him. Suffering is our vow and profession. Love which cannot suffer is unworthy of the name of love." The next day, at the appointed hour, he went to the Benedictine monastery in the Rue de Varennes, and sent in his name to Father de Crécy. He was shown not into the visitor's room, but into a private parlour, where Crécy came to him immediately. Dressed in the habit of his order, with a lofty and refined expression, he was a striking and attractive man, differing from the Jesuit in that, though both were equally persuasive, the latter united more power of controlling others than the appearance of Cressy implied. He had known Inglesant slightly at Oxford, and greeted him with great cordiality. "I'm not surprised that you are come to me, Mr. Inglesant," he said, with a most winning gesture and smile. "De Guevara, who was himself both a courtier and a recluse, says that the penance of religious men was sweeter than the pleasures of courtiers. Has your experience brought you to the same conclusion?" Inglesant thanked him for granting him an interview, and sitting down he told him shortly the story of his life, and his early partiality for the mystical theology, of his wishes and attempts, of his desire to follow the divine master, and of his failures and discouragements, his studies, his pagan sympathies, and how life and reality of every kind, and inquiry, and the truth of history and philosophy, even while it sided with or supported religion, still seemed to hinder and oppose the heavenly walk. "I do not know, Mr. Inglesant," said De Crecy, "whether your case is easier or more difficult than that of those who usually come to me. I have many come to me, and they usually, one and all, come with the exact words of the blessed gospel on their lips, 'Sir, we would see Jesus.' And I look them in the face often, and wonder, and often find no words to speak. See Jesus, I often think, I do not doubt it. Who would not wish to see him who is the fullness of all perfection that the heart and intellect ever conceived, in whom all creation has its centre, all the troubles and sorrows of life have their cure, all the longings of carnal men their fruition? But why come to me? Is he not walking to and fro on the earth continually in every act of charity and self-sacrifice that is done among men? Is he not offered daily on every altar, preached continually from every pulpit? Why come to me? Old men of 60 and 70 come to me with these very words, 'Sir, we would see Jesus.' If the course of 60 years, if the troubles and confusions of a long life, if he himself has not revealed this beatific vision to them, how can I? But with you it is very different. By your own story I know that you have seen Jesus, that you know him as you know your dearest friend. This makes our discourse at first much the easier, for I need waste no words upon a matter to enlarge upon which to you would be an insult to your heart. But it makes it more difficult afterwards when we come to ask how it is that, with this transcendental knowledge, you are still dissatisfied, and find life so difficult a path to tread. I make no apology for speaking plainly. Such would be as much an insult to you as the other. You remind me of the rich oratories I have seen of some of our court ladies, where everything is beautiful and costly, but where a classic statue of Apollo stands by the side of a crucifix, a Venus with Our Lady, a Cupid near St. Michael, and a pair of beads hanging on Mercury's caduceus. You are like the young men who came to Jesus and whom Jesus loved, for you have great possessions. You have been taught all that men desire to know, and are accomplished in all that makes life delightful. You have the knowledge of the past, and know the reality of men's power and wisdom and beauty, which they possess of themselves and did possess in the old classic times. You have called of the tree of knowledge, and know good and evil. Yea, the good that belongs to this world and is part of it, and the strength and wisdom and beauty of the children of this world, yea, and the evil and ignorance and folly of the children of light. Let us grant, I am willing to grant, that Plato has a purer spiritual instinct than St. Paul. I will grant that Lucretius has the wisdom of this world with him, ay, and its alluring tongue. Paul did not desire a spiritual insight, he wanted Jesus. You stand as a god, free to choose. On the one hand, you have the delights of reason and of intellect, the beauty of that wonderful creation which God made, yet did not keep, the charms of divine philosophy, and the enticements of the poet's art. On the other side, Jesus. You know him and have seen him. I need say no more of his perfections. I do not speak to you as I might speak to others of penalties and sufferings hereafter, in which probably you do not believe, nor do I speak to you as I might to others of evidences that our faith is true, of proofs that hereafter we shall walk with Christ and the saints in glory. I am willing to grant you that it may be that we are mistaken, that in the life to come we may find we have been deceived, nay, that Jesus himself is in a different station and position to what we preach. This is nothing to your purpose. To those who know him as you know him, and have seen him as you have, better Jesus, beaten and defeated, than all the universe besides, triumphing and crowned. I offer to you nothing but the alternative which every man sooner or later must place before himself. Shall he turn a deaf ear to the voice of reason, and lay himself open only to the light of faith, or shall he let human wisdom and human philosophy break up this light as through a glass, and please himself with the varied colours upon the path of life? Every man must choose, and having chosen, it is futile to lament and regret. He must abide by his choice and by the different fruit it brings. You wish this life's wisdom, and to walk with Christ as well, and you are your own witness that it cannot be. The two cannot walk together, as you have found. To you especially this is the great test and trial that Christ expects of you to the very full. We of this religious order have given ourselves to learning, as you know, nay, in former years to that pagan learning which is so attractive to you, though of late years we devote ourselves to producing editions of the Fathers of the Church. But even this you must keep yourself from. To most men this study is no temptation, to you it is fatal. I put before you your life, with no false colouring, no tampering with the truth. Come with me to Douay. You shall enter our house according to the strictest rule. You shall engage in no study that is any delight or effort to the intellect, but you shall teach the smallest children in the schools, and visit the poorest people, and perform the duties of the household, and all for Christ. I promise you on the faith of a gentleman and a priest, I promise you, for I have no shade of doubt, that in this path you shall find the satisfaction of the heavenly walk. You shall walk with Jesus day by day, growing ever more and more like to him, and your path without the least fall or deviation shall lead more and more into the light until you come unto the perfect day. And on your deathbed, the deathbed of a saint, the vision of the smile of God shall sustain you, and Jesus himself shall meet you at the gates of eternal life. Every word that Cressy spoke went straight to Inglesant's conviction, and no single word jarred upon his taste. He implicitly believed that what the Benedictine offered him he should find. There was no doubt, could be no doubt, that it was by such choice as this that such men as Cressy gained for themselves a power in the heavenly warfare, and not only attained to the heavenly walk themselves, but moved the earth to its foundations, and drew thousands into the ranks of Christ. He saw the choice before him fairly, as Cressy had said, and indeed it was not for the first time. Then his mind went back to his old master, and to that school where no such thing as this was required of him, and yet the heavenly light offered to him as freely as by this man. The sermon of the night before came into his mind again. Surely where such doctrine as that was preached, might he not find rest? It was true that his coming there and his confession closed his lips before Cressy, but might he not have been too hasty? Life was not yet over with him. Perchance he might yet find what he sought in some other way. He saw the path of perfect self-denial open before him, renunciation, not of pleasure, nor even of the world, but of himself, of his intellect, of his very life, and distinctly of his free choice. He refused it. This only may be said for him. He was convinced that every word the Benedictine had said to him was true, that in the life he offered him he should follow and find the Lord. But he was not equally convinced that it was the will of Christ that he should accept this life, and should follow and find him in this way and in no other. Had he been as clear of this as of the truth of Cressy's words, then indeed would his turning away have been a clear denial of Jesus Christ. But it was the voice of Cressy that spoke to him, and not the voice of Christ. It came to him with a conviction and a power all but irresistible, but it failed to carry with it the absolute conviction of the heavenly call. How could it? The heavenly call itself must speak very loud before it silences and convinces the unwilling heart. He rose from his seat before the monk, and looking sadly down upon him, he said, I believe all that you say and all that you promise, and that the heavenly walk lies before me in the road that you have pointed out, but I cannot follow it. It is too straight. I return your kindness and your plainness with words equally plain, and while you think of me as lost and unworthy, it may be some well-earned satisfaction to you to remember that none ever spoke truer or nobler or kinder words to any man than you have spoken to me. I do not look on you as lost, Mr. Inglesant, far from it, said Cressy, rising as he spoke. I expect you will yet witness a good confession for Christ in the world and in the court. But I believe you have had to-day a more excellent way shown you, which but for the trammels of your birth and training you might have had grace to walk in, for your own exceeding blessedness and the greater glory of the Lord Christ. I wish you every benediction of this life and of the next, and I shall remember you at the altar as a young man who came to Jesus and whom Jesus loves. Inglesant took his leave of him and left the monastery. He came away very sorrowful from Serenus to Cressy. Whether he also at the same time was turning away from Jesus Christ, who can tell? The next day the Jesuit arrived in Paris. End of section 28.